much more sharply than they're cutting dollars. They're cutting dollars by like about 8.6%, and they're cutting the euro holdings by like 30%. So
Even more, I
Have
guess.
they spoken at all about cryptocurrencies and what their stance is on that?
Anyone know
Great
Israel's
question.
take on crypto? It's a great
I
question.
think they said. I think they said by Doge.
Grown.
Okay. Okay.
Isn't Israel anyway the biggest aid recipient, and I mean they heavily depend on them pretty much everything nowadays. So I'm especially not just necessarily from technological advanced perspective, but at least even the aid. If you look at what the U.S. does for them, it's not even comparable. So I'm just wondering if they are really playing it smart.
We'll find, time will
We,
tell.
but Tyler could be
I
right,
think they
actually.
are.
If Tyler's right, this could be if Tyler's right. If Israel's that sophisticated to try to squeeze the U.S. a little bit to get the U.S. a little, it could be over Iran. I mean, it could be like, hey, we want to do what we want to do with Iran, and you're stopping us, or we don't like the Iranian nuclear deal that Biden's proposing, or whatever. And it could be something like that sophisticated. Actually, I
That's
mean,
why I
that's
say it's so
interesting.
clever. It's so clever because that move is technically
A
not
power move.
a power move, but from the U.S. perspective, it's a huge deal, and the U.S. is willing to offer a lot to take that piece off the table, and it cost Israel nothing to introduce that card on the table. So, or very relatively little. So that's why I say it's a very clever, savvy, geopolitical move. So,
There's a
Well, see,
reason why the U.S. never sold F-22s to Israel, and that's because Israel ends up selling off everything to everyone. So I think in the grand scheme of things, Israel has a different survival scenario than the U.S. The U.S. is isolated, whereas Israel has many enemies around it, so it has to have strong partnerships. So I don't know what the U.S. could give Israel in this particular instance, especially given that China has become friendly with Afghanistan.
But
okay.
I mean, if you look at, I think, the geopolitics of it with Israel, like you said, having a lot of, hostility in that Middle Eastern area, and usually they depend on the U.S. even to push through policies, right? Whether Trump recognizing, Jerusalem east side of it, or moving the embassy to Jerusalem, or other very, very sensitive things. So when they try to push a lot of geopolitical things, they usually use the US as an arm. So it could backfire from them
But
because I think. Mhm.
to try and decipher
But
the ask that Israel might have, and I think it was Sharon who I think very correctly pointed out, just like the U.S.'s big issue is the dollar, Israel's big issue at the moment is nuclear Iran. So that's a non-starter for them, and that's their big red line. So I imagine that the ask could be as like Sharon, I think it was Sharon said, we got to work together to keep Iran non-nuclear, and the U.S. plays a hugely significant role in that uh, ever ongoing Iran deal, which now involves Russia and China and everybody else. Oh my God, that's one of the, I can't believe there's not a Netflix series on that drama alone.
I think
Um,
Ken brought
Tyler,
the Iran aspect, which was amazing. I do agree.
yeah.
But
hi,
Tyler,
this is
Tyler, on
Irvin
that
down.
particular, just
Go
quickly,
ahead.
Irvin, on this particular point, we don't realize that there are $400 billion are going to be flowing into Iran, by the way, by China. So here we go, that theory.
Okay, so check this out.
Okay,
But how exactly will, I mean, and what you're referring to is purchasing oil, essentially, yes?
Well, it's going to be a mix of it. I think it's some of it is going. I think it's about like 26% or something like that. As a long time I checked, like I think 3 months ago. But
But
apart
by the
from that, it's towards the
yes,
infrastructure mainly.
yes. But keep in mind that Persian oil goes through, goes under India, passes Sri Lanka, which now you know why China's so interested in Sri Lanka, and goes over the Straits of Malacca, which is, by the way, just uh, you know soccer ball kick across, and that could get blocked in a moment's notice, and then China's energy hose is essentially cut dry instantly, and you think China could get very desperate very quickly if the Straits of Malacca were cut off. And by the way, now you know why the military coup happened in Myanmar, because China had laid pipelines in the event that anyone ever cuts off the Straits of Malacca to stop China's energy supply. They needed a land-based route that wasn't dependent on the Straits of Malacca, which they have through Myanmar, but the democratically elected government of Myanmar was shutting that down. So they had to send in the former regime to resume power there, and now you know why that was one of Beijing's big red lines, was that those pipelines, which go from the coast of Myanmar to Kunming, China, by the way, in kind of southern central China. And now those pipelines are, which, by the way, aren't really that active, but those are a critical emergency backup plan if anyone ever tries to stop China's energy imports through the Straits of Malacca, which would absolutely kneecap China in a heartbeat. So, can we go to the tech news? Okay, good. So, air horn, please. Effects. Thank you for everybody for being patient. Thank you for joining us. Happy Monday, April 25th. Your big story today is this guy, this Elon Muskie, is back in the news. Bloomberg says they have sources that Twitter could reach a deal with this Mr. Musk for a takeover at $54.20. That was his original offer.
David shared that in the background, and I lost my shit immediately and came upstage.
I really want to understand what happened in the last 48 hours, because his tweet,
Agreed.
why he was saying I'm moving on. What did that
No, the
mean?
moving on was
I
about
feel
Bill
like that
Gates.
was a bait and switch.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
He amended that tweet and said, "I'm moving on, ... And then he did a response to that tweet saying, moving on off of the Bill Gates shorting of Tesla was his point. Anyway.
Hey, Tyler, just to
Yes,
correct one thing that was said
sure.
a couple of seconds ago. There's no country that actually gets the actual F-22. I mean, because there's something called the OB Amendment
That
that
was
was actually.
Eric.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying there's something called the OB Amendment that was done in 1998. It's very specific to the F-22. They were concerned that it would be reverse engineered if it got out of the United States. So we don't sell it to Japan. We don't sell it to Great Britain. We don't sell it to anybody because of that amendment. It's not just Israel, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know, but one of the discussions surrounding that amendment was the risk from Israel selling the technology specifically. So if you check the resource on
Oh,
that, I think that's one of the main arguments.
Yeah, no, but can that, I gotta say, I absolutely love when you make points like this, that because it defanged. Eric made a point, and you add in this bigger context like that. You find some sources, some ground truth, and introduce the bigger context, and you do it on a nightly basis. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's fantastic when you do that, because you're right. That's amazing. And by the way, I didn't know that. That's a really interesting aspect of the F-22 that I didn't know. So thank you for that.
And they are talking about reverse engineering some of not reverse. The United States has talked about maybe making some modifications because they want to sell some to Japan, by the way, right? But they haven't.
Wait,
So they're trying to figure out.
that's one of the headlines coming up in the next 20 minutes.
Okay.
By the Japan remilitarization. They're trying to amend their own constitution to remilitarize at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it was after a senator whose last name was the name of the amendment itself as well. So.
Okay, so back to this.
Well,
Elon Musk.
Obi's a House member, so he's not a senator, so it couldn't be
Okay,
him.
back to Mr. Musk. Twitter could make the decision any minute today, and Twitter stock is up 4% early today as a result, according to the headline. Twitter is in the final stretch of negotiations about the sale to Elon Musk, a person with knowledge of the matter said. With knowledge of knowledge. A person with knowledge of the matter said. According
That's
to
a tongue switcher.
Yeah. And then Reuters says they have an exclusive that Twitter set to accept Musk's best and final offer. Well, if you remember, Elon said this is my one and only offer. It was 54.20, and he said I'm jumping right to the end. And to his credit, he didn't blink and he hasn't budged. And then Twitter definitely tried to do a little bit of a really. It was interesting to watch in hindsight if this does end up this deal ends up finishing in today. That Twitter initially implied that they weren't sort of interested, and then the whole poison pill drama, and then all this to finally come to ostensibly to shake Mr. Musk to see if he was sincere in saying that this is his one and only, final firm offer. And he didn't blink, he didn't budge. So now they're coming back around to take it. It's quite interesting. So New York Times says they have sources that Twitter's board met yesterday on a Sunday to
Oh, it's going
discuss.
through.
That means it's going through. Exactly right. When the board
Yep,
gets
it's
together on a
going through.
Sunday, that means you're wasting my time at the racquetball court, and let's get this over with. So I don't like losing. Had to sacrifice a round of golf for this meeting. So to discuss Elon Musk's bid, which is being considered more seriously after Musk's filing detailed, and then Reuters said they've done analysis that Elon Musk's Twitter bid includes a risky $12.5 billion margin loan secured against Tesla. And the New Yorker says Elon Musk's bid for Twitter appears to be about preserving Twitter as a means for himself and others to continue influencing vast audiences without interference. Okay. Anyone with a take on this Mr. Musk and Twitter? No. And still, no one. I seem to be out in left field all on my own with my
Listen, I'm
own.
I'm scared. I'm really scared. I don't know what he'll do with Twitter. I've seen him engage. This is going to be chaos and mayhem, and I'm seeing an opportunity for great profits. I'm sorry for being so bad, but
I
yes, if he tweets Doge, I'm going to go ahead and follow the trend. It's going to be fun. But also, I'm thinking about how he can leverage this politically, geopolitically. How can he leverage this for Tesla and other projects? This is nuanced for me. I'm not comfortable with a person who has so much sway having such a seat. But I'm
Yeah.
also curious enough to want to see the ride.
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
some of
that's the exact issue that I have, just a single person having this much power, especially knowing that some of the things he does sometimes just, out of a blue is just some concerning for me. But anyway, yeah, who am I?
By the way,
I think Tyler. Sorry,
yes.
go ahead.
One second.
So
There's
sure.
a lot of unknowns. One thing we do know, he's been very crystal clear about the fact that he intends to come up with a means, a vehicle, a program, a scheme to verify all verifiable people on Twitter. Why would he have such an interest in that? As the CEO of one of the world's um, pioneering digital payment systems.
I was just
Because
going to say
he because
monetization.
he knows what data could do for you. Remember, data. I think we say it in our room when we talk. Data is the new oil, right? You talk about how sweet data it is. So if you have to verify some people, you collect a lot of personal data, and that data is very very important going forward for any big tech. So especially starting from PayPal, like I think it was Sharon who mentioned it, that he knew how important it is to have data and be in control of it, because he's gonna buy it and he's gonna be the solo controller of the entire company.
Okay,
I think
so
we had the conversation. Like I mean, when first time it came up, I think that data thing. Like I sort of like raised that point, in detail. That what I think that is scraping the data off the Twitter is going to be in the future, especially with his Neuralink thing, is going to be like becoming a god thing, basically. But I think some of the conversations I've actually seen on the threads on his own tweets, I think it's more like it that he's going to be straight away going towards actually authenticating the users. So probably that $3 thing, is going to become that you actually, become a blue badge or some whatever badge in the middle badge, and then you get authenticated. And obviously, the third point was your payment thing, that will be able to actually do all the payments through it. But I think identification is becoming a lot bigger issue
Yep.
lately on Twitter, and
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the first move for him.
You know what I want to do? You guys won't believe me. I don't expect you to believe me. Some of you who've been here from the beginning will recall some of my early stories of um, potentially joining Twitter as number 30, actually, to be very precise. And I had multiple meetings with the founders back then. And in my meetings, I drove home. My main point back then, Twitter was still very new. And in fact, my buddy Jason was the biggest user on Twitter at the moment with a whopping 60,000 followers that he had back then. And I remember driving home the point that, and this was my biggest point by far, was that it needed to have identity verification baked in. Because at that point, I had already been to Korea and had seen how they had done identity verification for everybody, kind of using the Korean internet. And I must have mentioned it in one of the emails, and I wanted to pull up to try and find the email and read it because I haven't done that myself. But maybe I'll do that before we meet again next time. But I just remember being, and by the way, that's I myself I verified in my Twitter account, even though I probably shouldn't be. Except that I think when they announced the program, I said, "Oh, great that you're finally doing the program." And then next thing you know, I had a blue check like in the first like
Ask and
five
you shall
hours,
receive.
right? In the first 5 hours of the rumors of the program being started, I magically had a blue check mark. So um, anyway, I've always thought that the identity is, people are starting to realize in Web3 just how powerful and important a web of verified accounts is for payment purposes online. As we start to do more and more and more of our purchases online, your provable identity online and an account of being able to share any, especially when you go into cryptocurrencies, having a verified account makes things a whole lot easier, whatnot. So, next story, yes, is Oracle patches a critical bug in Java, which lets attackers forge TLS certificates and signatures, two-factor authentication messages, and more. Oh shit, that's a huge problem
That's wow.
because
That's every measure that we have to protect our information. And Java's like very popular language.
indeed, especially in important applications, I should say. A lot of banking is done in Java, by the way.
Logistics.
Uh, that's of the programs that I do know, Java is my strongest programming language. Java is a significant language, especially in important industries, and this is quite a major vulnerability. Thank God it's being patched. The vulnerability, which Oracle patched on Tuesday, affects the company's implementation of something called the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm in Java version 15 and above. Okay, so I think it's.
So that was found internally, no external leaks?
I don't know. Well, this is always the game, which is people find vulnerabilities, and the quote unquote white hats report it to whoever the creator is, and the black hats don't report it, and they save it for a rainy day so that they can cash it in some other way. And the white hats often do monetize in the form of bug bounties or whatever, and good companies will often give a reward for reporting things like this, and the black hats will sit on it and trade it on the dark web. So let's hope that this was turned in rather quickly, and maybe Tom, is Tom on stage? Yeah, he often joins us.
Yep, he tried to get on stage, but I tried to invite him a few
Yeah,
times.
I see him with his hand up, but I accepted the invite.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, Johan, do you have any thoughts on this Java vulnerability?
Yeah. So that one came out, it was kind of huge. And here's the tricky part to a lot of these vulnerabilities. is it ends up starting off as a tweet from an account, and then the account disappears. Usually it's an account, from China. So we're wondering if it's somebody on the inside that actually, realizes somebody found the 0 day and is trying to alert people. That one in particular is going to be huge considering certain applications that are written in multiple languages. So, for instance, when you download, for instance, one that we use all the time that's kind of important would be like Signal. So, Signal's built in iOS, but it's also built for Android. So, the question is, will applications like that be vulnerable? And it all depends on the Java version because the interception of the SSL piece is the key thing. Can they do man in the middle of text? Can they sniff what people are communicating? When you turn around and you look at most of these web apps, you turn around and say, okay, another perfect example, Apache, probably one of the most well-known application servers that are out there. Tomcat, it's all in Java. So that means are the communications going to be compromised and to what extent? So this is going to be another one that takes lots of fun weeks of research.
Okay. So next story is that Apple warns it will remove apps from the Apple App Store that haven't been updated in a significant amount of time. Although the reality is they don't give a shit. It's not an issue of that. It's an issue of there's something in the new update that they want to make damn sure that you have. And if you don't have it, they don't want you in their store. And they're saying it's giving developers 30 days to update if you haven't updated in a while. And what it really means is if you don't have this new feature that we need you to have in all your apps, you can get the F out. So it says wiping apps that haven't been updated in a quote-unquote significant amount of time. Apple may be cracking down on apps that no longer receive updates. Oh, so they want to make sure that your apps are receiving updates.
There's actually a background information to this one. Google is doing the same for Google Chrome Store. Firefox is doing it as well. And this has to do with the privacy settings and privacy laws that have been changed since the apps were cleared. And now they need them to have updated all the plugins and the apps to withstand the new laws in the United States, Britain after the exit from Brexit, and the EU as well as Australian has figured out new laws for privacy, and there are tons and tons and tons of apps and applications that do not fulfill. So now they're pushing it. You wonder.
Oh, that's interesting that would be a byproduct of the new regulation system.
No, it's interesting because, and he brings up a great point because nowadays, since all these exploits are coming out, they're starting to look at, okay, what are these old packages that are out there? Because if you remember last week, there were a couple of critical flaws that came out with Android. And the number one being is to a Qualcomm firmware. It hasn't been updated in 11 years. So they're trying to crack down on that as to what are bad packages and should we still be using these bad packages? Because they're starting to look at third-party software, open source, stuff like that, as third-party risk. And also essentially like insider risk because it's so embedded into the applications. It's literally in 80% of the 80. I think Verizon Data Breach Report reported it about 80 to 84% of the applications have a large portion of open source in it. So everyone's starting to look closer at that.
Okay, next up from Bloomberg, Mark Gurman says that the iPhone 14, which will come out in the second Tuesday of September, as it always does, there's now expectations, they're calling it, that it will have a larger 6.7-inch non-Pro Max. That is interesting. While the Pro models will get the A16 chip, a 48 megapixel wide-angle camera, and a pill-shaped and circular notch cutouts. Well, how big are these pill-shaped and circular notch cutouts exactly? Well, we will know soon, I imagine. Here it is. The notch will include a pill-shaped cutout for Face ID and a circular cutout for the camera. Oh, I see. So two little small cutouts at the top instead of one big notch. So one's probably the pinhole for the camera because it doesn't need to be much bigger than that, and for the Face ID, it probably is like a double pinhole, so that you can have the whatever that uh, what is that sensor, Ben, that does 3D scanning? LiDAR?
The LiDAR sensor.
Yeah. So, by the way, speaking of
Yeah,
that,
LiDAR. And by the way, that's not on all the time. I tested that. I heard somebody, data or somebody, say that LiDAR sensor's on all the time, gathering all the data about your room. It's not. You can see it through an infrared camera. It's only on when you ask it to be.
by the
Yeah,
way,
could I suggest go?
John, you're in the Matrix, my friend. And while you're coming out, the somebody, and I believe it was Eric, sent me a DM, and I'm sure it was Eric, of a new Google-based technology that can convert a photo of a person standing head to toe into a 3D model from a single photo, very convincingly.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say, Tyler, is that there's a race to obsolescence in mobile phones. If you think about how soon it will be that our primary screen will be our AR glasses, and how our phone will just stay in our pocket, and our communication with it will be through voice and gestures. The form factor of the phone itself is going to be obsoleted by the form factor of AR glasses in the end game, and it's ripe for disruption.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what John said. I think the only concern is like, what is the nature of that kind of energy source close to your head? What the batteries are? I definitely think it's going to be really exciting. But the story that I think Tyler mentioned with reference to the rendering of a person from just an image, I think it's called Forum. And just as myself, I've been playing around with some AI tools to see, hey, could it really improve animation? Could it make it easier to make an animated series, for example? And I'm quite surprised that just commercial level tools on like the App Store, you're able to put together something that's actually quite impressive that I think a few years ago would have cost quite a few $1,000s in commercial software. So the automation tools are not only going to make the animation possible or easier. But in this particular case, the rendering of the metaverse is going to be much easier because then you'll just scan yourself from a photo that you have, and it's able to hypothesize what's behind you, even though it doesn't see behind you. So that kind of shocked me. The first time that I saw something like that was that Will Smith movie from long ago called Enemy of the State. So they had that computer hypothesize the geometry of the other side of the bag. And here the computer is doing a similar thing, but with human bodies. So it's quite interesting.
Okay, so the article from Bloomberg says that it'll be four different models: the 6.1-inch iPhone 14, a 6.7 iPhone 14 Max, and then the same size 6.7-inch iPhone 14 Pro Max. So they come in two different sizes, 6.1 and 6.7, and you can get them in either standard or Pro, basically. And the Pro is going to have the A16 chip, and the non-Pro, the standard, will have the A15 chip. That's seemingly the biggest difference. Okay. So moving on, the next one is from the Washington Post that Apple, Amazon, and Google have turned to old union-busting tactics, like surveilling workers suspected of organizing, posting propaganda, and hiring consultants. Tech companies are facing increasing momentum from workers trying to unionize, and according to the headline, are using union-busting tactics, such as surveilling workers. Let's see if there's more dirt on that one. The unionizing workers at Amazon join a larger movement across the country, triggered in part by high inflation and the pandemic. Workers at Starbucks voted to unionize, well, to be specific, one store. That's kind of, you, as a journalist, you probably should mention that, not implying that Starbucks is union. Workers at Starbucks voted to unionize. No, like 10 of them did. And Kellogg workers agreed to a new contract after months of striking. Yeah, they more or less lost that one, by the way. What? Why are you trying to paint that they won? Your Washington Post should not be framing the grammar in such a way to imply that both of those are more than what they are. Kellogg's workers essentially lost, and Starbucks is, you're leading the reader astray with your grammar there. The shift is most notable in the tech industry, where giants such as Amazon, Google, and Apple have long warded off worker activism with a mix of tools, including high pay. Oh, how dare they start paying people more? That is so shady. Plentiful employee perks. Oh, no, they didn't. They're giving them perks now? How can they sleep with
No,
them?
I don't like this. No. Take it
This
back to
is
sender.
it's just so evil. It's that old trick, just paying people money and giving them perks. That old. It's kind of like, they're just gaslighting these people with cash, basically. And beloved consumer brands and core missions that made their workforces feel they were making the world a better place. Oh, good. How they're convincing these people that they actually have meaning in their lives. How dare they? How dare they do that?
Oh, it's not for profit. I'm sorry, I was mistaken all this time.
But blue collar workers undergird the tech industry, and they often don't have access to the benefits of the corporate jobs. The Amazon labor union notched a historic win this month at an 8,000 worker warehouse in Staten Island, following years of unsuccessful efforts by national unions to organize workers. Yeah. Okay. Well, it sounds to me, Washington Post, like you're rooting for the unions here, and you're not even remotely ambiguous about it, which you should be. The point used to be that you would just kind of report the news. I know you're a tabloid now,
Well,
and that's okay.
particularly when they're owned by Bezos. I mean, how long is that going to happen? Where they're going to be pro-union before Bezos, reaches down and fires some people,
Yeah.
baby? I
Well,
mean, think
the best
about that.
the best line
Great point, Ken.
the best line from the Washington Post in recent memory was chastising Elon wanting to buy Twitter, that how it would be totally egregious for a billionaire to have so much control of a media company. So Washington Post clearly has no lack of uh, self-awareness skills, being owned by a billionaire themselves, as they are.
Well,
Irony.
interesting
No
thing.
lack of irony.
Howard Schultz has been a lot more aggressive on the union situation than Bezos, even though Howard Schultz is a liberal Democrat. I mean, which typically would support unions, except when he's running a company, he doesn't want this. It's that self interest. Howard Schultz, if he owned the Washington Post, probably would be a lot more hands on what they're printing on unions than Jeff Bezos has been. Because Howard Schultz is already, Starbucks, by the way, has got a problem. The National Labor Relations Board just filed an action against them, that they thought that Starbucks is taking illegal actions to, prevent more unions in the stores.
Are they giving the workers free drinks now? The
Um,
They always gave them free drinks.
Yeah, well, now they can get a
It
venti
might be the
with,
egg bites. It might be the
hey,
egg bites. That might be the selling point.
extra. You get free milk upgrades now with extra double whipped cream, double cup. Extra hot. They're rolling out the perk train with gravy train with biscuit wheels. They're giving these Starbucks workers to keep them from.
It's a no deal. I mean, all the deals are off if you don't put sprinklers on top of that whipped cream. I imagine there's going to be a strike.
I something tells me they get to eat as many of those stale croissants at the end of the day as they want. That might
Do us all a favor. I'm happy to give it to them.
for the
I'm
love of God, Starbucks. You're one of the most powerful companies on the planet. Can you please get a decent croissant? Anyone who's ever been to Europe begs you.
Please and thank you.
Why
Please
can't,
stop disappointing us.
of all we've got, quantum computers, we've got the metaverse, We've got cold fusion happening. We're even reversing aging. Can we please figure out a fucking
But
croissant?
we
Please.
still got shitty croissant, and it doesn't have the butter flavor. I'm disappointed.
It's there's not an ounce of flakiness in these things. What is going on? What's going on? If you want a conspiracy theory, why are we eating shitty croissants in 2022?
I'm loving this. Just so you know, a
It's
little
sad
too
that
much.
Costco has better croissants than
Because you
Starbucks.
didn't
That's a
go to
great
the right
point.
bakery.
That's so true.
Actually, we don't have croissant here in Taiwan in the Starbucks.
What?
Yeah, we
Oh,
have
I'm so
others
you're
that's more
deprived.
delicious.
This is one of the
Uh,
interesting, important, subtle differences between Japan and the rest of Asia. Japan is obsessed with actually making a decent croissant, and they go to great lengths to master the art of the replication and the techniques, and they do, and you can get decent croissants and macaroons, and
or croque monsieur,
and
They seem to make it much better than
even
even the
even
Parisians.
pastas and pizzas. I mean, you gotta love the Japanese obsession with perfect
I've had the
replicas.
best pasta there.
They make insane pasta in Japan. Anyway, so the next story is about leaked images seem to show a Google Pixel watch, a testing model that was left at a U.S. restaurant with a minimalist design in black, a crown, and a proprietary Google band. Now, I've got a thought on this one. A leaked watch. I'm sorry. A
Intentional.
Yeah, of course it's intentional. What these
Who
things don't.
takes off their watch at a
Who
restaurant or
leaks out
wherever?
a real design, a new design? No, no, no one.
So it was left at a U.S. restaurant, and now there's leaked images of the watch. Give me a break. That's two levels of. First, the watch had to have been left. Then somebody would have had to leak photos of it. So there's two steps to making this happen. And the Google PR team's working overtime because they remember when the Apple iPhone, I think it was the 4 or the 3, when somebody left that behind somewhere in Palo Alto, and Gizmodo got copies of that. Anyway, it does
Did
look.
they happen to leave their latest
It was
new
left in a
Nike model at
bar.
the shoot at the table too?
No, but I'm looking at the photo of this thing, and it is very sexy looking. I have to, for a Google device, I have to say. The Google Pixel Watch. A source who sent the images to Android Central said what could be the Pixel Watch was left and found at a restaurant in the US. The images of what could be the watch seem to match many rumors that have leaked, including the minimalist design, the crown, the potential hidden button. It looks like the watch has proprietary Google bands. We don't know what the charging will look like, as the watch did not come with a charger. A Google Pixel Watch was apparently left and found at a restaurant in the US, and the images sent by a source to Android Central, which no doubt must be Google's favorite tech publication, which adds more credibility to this conspiracy theory that this is a Google PR move. Android Central looked like what could be Google's first smartwatch, and Android Central has reviewed the images of the watch that could be announced during Google I/O next month. Oh wow, what a coincidence! There's a big Google I/O. Their big annual event is next month, and now you've got a reason to watch the event because the leaks just came out about this.
Oh,
Oh wow!
sensationalizing it. This
But
is
I
Oh,
mean,
just.
it's Google. It's Google. Couldn't they come up with something better than that?
That's what I was
no,
thinking.
because
We're
people,
tired of these
It's
tricks.
Google. That's why they couldn't.
but people like there's a premium perception of value of information that is seemingly exclusive or the human reaction to rumoring is intense. There somebody, I'm sure there are books written on human gossip and the power of gossip, and the reason why across every culture, across all time, it's almost like the human urge to reproduce. There's some bizarre aspect of gossip that tickles people, and that's why stories like this
I mean,
work.
if they were going to do something like that, they could have at least left it on an airplane, an international flight between U.S. and China or something. That'll get them talking inside the plane.
But Tyler, Google has never been historically like as secretive as, I mean, if you are doing a comparison with Apple, I mean, they do not come with like even 1/10 of it. So I mean, they are not historically. I mean, that's not Google's culture to be secretive about their products. I mean,
And that could be
yeah, fine.
exactly why they do it.
Yeah.
That could be exactly why they did this.
So the source of the photo said to the publication that I'm reading this from that it could be a testing model, and it was found at a restaurant. The source requested to not publish their name or the restaurant's name, including the location, in order.
That's
How about this?
interesting.
I have a headline. It could be a piece of crap, and that's why someone left it in the restaurant.
Ouch, that's harsh.
Is that a net? Because, like, I swear I love you.
Oh my God, check this out. So the next paragraph says this leak is very reminiscent of when Gizmodo reported about the iPhone 4 prototype that was lost and found at a bar. There, wow, there you
Yep.
go. I thought,
Yep, that's exactly why.
yeah.
And because who takes off their watch in a restaurant?
Yes, exactly.
That
When's the
doesn't
last
even look
time?
like a watch. It looks like Flavor Flav's clock around his neck.
Oh,
It
snap.
looks cool though. It
Oh
looks
damn!
okay. Next up, UK virtual events startup called Hopin, which raised $1 billion and reached a $7.8 billion valuation, is now struggling. Its Explore page has less than 500 events listed, down from 15,000 previously. Wow. British group.
Oh, it's done for.
Well, yeah, they were like Zoom, one of the darlings of the early stages of COVID for sure.
Yeah, they were a pandemic play, and
Yeah,
they're over.
yeah.
And they probably also used the words blockchain and decentralized in their pitch.
Well, they didn't need to because it
No,
was,
they didn't have to.
yeah, it seemed like we were going to shift into a world of permanently online events, and that was sort of the gamble in a sense. And they could have been right in some weird way, but it seems like humans have as somebody who organizes events. I'm clearly biased here, although anyway, it does seem people want to return to physical events again. There's some kind of um, notable urge that people have to want to meet physically. The Lucas Shaw at Bloomberg, although, hold on, Ken, was Lucas not at Variety before? He must have been. Did we lose Ken? Or to Ken? Is Ken still on stage? Did we lose him?
He's on
Oh
stage.
yeah, he is, but
He's on.
he's muted.
Yeah, he's
Hold,
there.
hold on. Let me do a quick search on Lucas Shaw Variety, because last I recall, he was at Variety.
Okay, calling
Yeah, he
Ken.
was at Variety, and now he's at Bloomberg. There you go. Okay. Here's his Twitter profile. What does it say? It says, reporter for Bloomberg, but views my own. I write a newsletter about Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. But when I look at, he's based in LA, and his email used to be at Variety. So yeah. Anyway, he's at Bloomberg now, and here's the story. It says,
Well, he just got promoted, Tyler. I was doing something, so I couldn't respond to you, but he just got promoted. He was just like he was an entertainment reporter, and now he's got like a more of a senior position there.
he has a scoop. According to sources, Netflix. He's writing about his favorite beat again at Netflix, which we have covered a few of his stories about Netflix. He has sources about now. Ken, this is interesting, is it not? Because did we not remember when there was some kind of leaky news about Netflix, and you and I got into a friendly little debate about if I recall correctly,
Right,
I
right. You thought he had a jaded position for some non-journalistic reason,
no no no
and
what I'm
I probably defended him as saying that's what he does. He's go ahead.
no 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 my I remember what I'm referring to is I suspected that Netflix was using him to leak information, and he was, and this to me fits that thought that I had. I don't know if I expressed that thought or not, but the fact that he has sources, exclusive scoop sources, help reconfirms in my own mind that Netflix is. He has a very good friend at Netflix where he's getting news from. Obviously, he says that's why he says he has
Well,
sources.
reporters do that. That doesn't make him a
Yeah,
Netflix pawn. They'll take information from anywhere. If
sure.
Elon wants to leak information to him, he'll report that too.
Yeah, but it's this seemingly has a the I think tech startups often have favorite reporters, and I think they really like Lucas and they leak him stuff anyway. So it says he has sources that Netflix staff morale is sagging amid its cratering stock price, subscriber losses, and an engineering restructuring to create levels such as Junior. As Netflix shares plunge, so he clearly has friends at the company who are telling him what the view from the inside. Which we could ping in our old friend Ada Ada, who is kind of one of the original OGs of tech news, who works at Netflix, last I recall. But this we don't really need to. I think we could take that one at face value. Like no doubt, they just had one of the worst quarter reports for a tech company in recent history. Holy shit, clobbered.
Well, let's put that in context. They
Yeah,
had the stock decline that
yeah,
looked like that. The actual report wasn't really that bad. I mean, I just want to put something in perspective. They actually beat on EPS,
okay,
so they had the subscriber issue. Their churn rate was not massive. Okay, I have seen in terms of like real substantive stuff. I've seen far worse reports from tech companies than Netflix. It's just basically we're in a period that's a lot of sensitivity with rising interest rates, and this is where it's in its own valuation. And the fact that they just had given some guidance like a quarter before, and all of a sudden they couldn't meet it. So I mean, but I have seen worse. It's just the way that the stock reacted, but I mean the actual substance of the report. I mean, they actually beat the EPS number. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I've
yeah,
seen worse.
yeah,
Okay.
yep,
Yeah, but
okay,
if you look overall at what's happened with Netflix and its history, it's more at the tail end because of all of the other streaming networks that are out there at a much cheaper price point, who have better content, more available for people. You know, you have like the HBO Max, you have Disney Plus, you have Hulu, and those three combined are uh, far outweigh HBO Max far outweighs Netflix, right? In its content, and it's at a cheaper price point, and Netflix just keeps raising its price, without the content and with no like play for gathering content. When was the last time you tried searching for a movie and you actually found it on Netflix,
I don't
right?
disagree with any of that, but when Tyler says it's like the worst thing, I mean, we could talk about Tyler. I don't know if you even have memories of this. Companies like Miniscribe that used to make hard disk, the old hard disk drives that was an accounting fraud. They had to go report that. There's much worse situations than Netflix and tech. To say that it's I mean, and I can give you 20 of them. In fact,
yeah,
I actually ended up on the board of directors many years ago of a tech company that we had because we were buying the bonds and everything at like 30 cents on the dollar. We had to force them into bankruptcy. How's that for a bad report?
yeah,
Okay, okay. I mean, so this, and that was a tech company too. So I mean, I've been through too much to suggest that what happened to Netflix in terms of actual substance was like one of the worst things that's ever happened to a tech company. The stock price certainly reacted like that
yep,
because it had a super premium valuation,
yep.
but to
I
begin with,
agree.
it got reduced.
Yeah,
But that's all I wanted to. The only point I wanted to make.
But I think it just shows that where the trajectory of Netflix is going, right? Like this is just a starting point. You know, the boom of it was during COVID when everyone was at home and streaming. Now prices are high. The extra $20 a month that it costs you for Netflix is now going into your car, so you can go back and forth to places. So it just seems like where are people able to cut? Most people don't have or live paycheck to paycheck, so where are they able to cut their means? And Netflix just seems like the obvious choice. And I don't think that that's a short term thing. I think that is going to be the long term. I think that Netflix is like at the tail end of where Blockbuster was, like what Netflix did to Blockbuster. I think these other streaming services are going to wind up doing to Netflix.
Well, first, Netflix can cut off the ability to have all your family members use one account, and they can.
Which they actually announced today that they're going to charge for outside services. Like if it's outside of your home, they'll charge an extra fee for it for the
Yeah,
login.
because I mean, my entire family uses my Netflix.
Yep.
yep. Okay, next.
I agree with Ken's point. I mean, I don't think Netflix is really. I mean, we're talking about 200,000 subscribers after they lost a million because they shut off Russia, is really not that bad. The stock price drop was after having an 80% increase in the stock price over COVID because everybody thought, well, now everybody's going
Right.
to have Netflix. That's the reason why this drop looks so big. Otherwise, they're not doing bad at all.
No, no, but the people who are talking about the long-term prognosis may be correct, but that may take another 10 or 12 years, and so I don't think the stock dropped that much because someone's looking out 12 years about Netflix becoming blockbuster. It was like, I mean, the stock market is sometimes very short term because they had given guidance, even taking into account Russia, they should have added 2 million net subs, and they only added 500,000 if you discount Russia. Okay, so that was the principal reason, and also unlike this group here, because we've been talking about it, where I mean, I had said that they're going to probably go to some advertising model. Most of the world didn't know that. Okay, I mean, and therefore the reaction to Reed Hastings speaking on when he did their it's not really an analyst call what he did, but it's like they do an analyst interview, but he just blurted it out about the advertising thing, and that was a shock to some people, and that hurt the stock too.
That's what we did
I
at SiriusXM before I left. Is that, they were competing with Spotify so much, they decided to try to be the largest in North America, basically capitalizing off ad revenue. So I think that was Ken you were speaking. I agree with you 100%. And so they need to really look at that model.
So the one
I
thing is
think
to go on. Sorry.
I think one key thing everybody has missed is the content acquisition. So I don't know how could you guys miss. So in terms of the actual overall evolving Netflix from the DVD all the way to the streaming bit, I mean there's still innovation going on, and one of the key innovation was in the recent times was the actual content acquisition, which you cannot actually watch anywhere else. That's one thing. Secondly, in terms of actually empowering those content producers to provide them. And we actually discussed this, like, I don't know, whether a month or a couple of months ago, this is a specific point that all these content producers, like all the filmmakers and everything, they are providing them everything. They're saying, like, you don't have to actually go to the producer, you don't have to raise funds, you come to our studios, you do all that, and we'll buy off you. So I think that's going to go on for long. So if you are doing this like calculation that is going to be actually soon at the tail end of it as compared to the blockbuster, I don't think it's the right calculation. And it's going to, I think there's going to be next step in terms of the innovation cycle soon coming out. So I think, underestimate that Netflix at this point, I think that would be counterproductive.
But
There is
currently, sorry.
go on, BB. Sorry.
That Netflix just cut off the whole animation team last week. So currently, I think besides acquisition, actually they are cutting off the original investment as well.
Something to consider is the HR strategy for Netflix is very unique. They basically said, we run this thing like a sports team. We take whatever people have, we run to recruit the best, and then we look at every job they've ever had, what's the highest version of any price thing that they've had, and then we'll double it. And then we throw in a bunch of stock options for good measure because we consider that we're buying the best sports team people that we can get. Now, the moment that your performance lags, you're fired. But the idea is that they wanted to have this extraordinary amount of we will pay is we want the best in the world and we will pay fortunes for it. Now, what's interesting is that sports teams metaphor was so ruthless. The HR director that came up for it, well, she didn't meet her own thing, so that they fired her. This sort of thing has led to a hyper concentration of extremely talented people. If you go through the Netflix engineering blog, the amount of technical backends on what they've done from the software stack is astounding, especially in terms of reliability when you look at how much uptime they've had compared to so many other different models. Chaos engineering is spectacular. But here's something to consider. If they've been recruited under the idea of the company has no loyalty to you and you put up your performance and then you can have the best, when the company itself can't perform that and your stock options suddenly are in the toilet, well, those amazing rock star employees start looking elsewhere.
Yeah,
Now,
but
man,
Chris, one of the things people keep talking about stock options with Netflix, and I want to make a point here. Netflix was able to recruit because I know so many people in Hollywood in LA, okay, and this has been an issue for years. Their principal recruitment tool was cash, not stock options, okay.
yes.
They basically overpaid employees. They would pay 2 3 times, not just 20% more. They would sometimes hire people at 2 or 3 times what they were getting paid somewhere else. So, given that cash level of compensation, I think they're less impacted by this stock option issue than other companies. Even though if Lucas Shaw's reporting is correct, and the employees are now asking for reset options, I don't think Netflix can do that without further blowing up their stock.
Uh, yeah,
I think there would be a proxy contest. I think they fire the management. That is not going to happen. They're just going to have to survive like every other shareholder who got hit.
Ken is correct. Actually, that was a key part of the compensation package. Is they said there's a lot of complicated ways of doing this, but we prefer just to do cold hard cash, which is actually very different from how a lot of their peers do things. So they are affected by this a little bit more uniquely. So they do have the stock options things for the senior groups, but it's calculated a little bit differently. Well, one thing that's really interesting from the personnel side is Netflix has successfully handled disasters before, like even pretty impressive ones. People barely remember Quick Flicks when they tried to shuttle their DVD thing a little bit too harshly when they moved all online. They were able to navigate that. So this isn't necessarily like a oh crap the company's over thing, but it's definitely going to be a hard thing for them to pivot for. They have successfully handled a few of these in the past. What's more interesting though is if they aren't able to navigate the internal employee thing. The reason why I find this intriguing is if they have a crisis of confidence in their internal bits, that could lead to some exodus of some really interesting tech talent. Now, those sorts of people, if they have enough like ambition factor, which you're recruiting that kind of thing, that could lead to a lot of really interesting spin-off companies because the reliability things they figured out are astounding. If you ever go to the back end of the internet and you go visit some ISP data centers, you can see a Netflix box. They aren't that big. It's like two or three server racks with things. I've seen the one in Seattle. There's others in other countries, etc. You only have to make a few hundred of those, put them around the world to get the physical hardware to replicate a Netflix style infrastructure. The thing that makes it actually work isn't just the hardware investment and strategically only doing it, but it's knowing how to code it. It's knowing how to architect the back end so that it actually plays nicely with everything else. And that takes an extraordinary amount of talent to do. But if you know the trick for it, it doesn't take nearly as much capital to replicate Netflix level infrastructure as people think it does. You just have to be really smart about optimizing for our current network for how it's been built.
But
So
it's
I'm
about
very interested in the
content,
spin-offs from this.
right? It's about content. It's not about the hardware. The hardware, of course, is like the easier part. You create a bunch of server farms in different locations. If you don't have the content to provide, who's going to, come to my store? It's great, but I have nothing to sell, even though it looks really pretty.
I would
And by
strongly
So,
that
disagree on
one
this.
made by
Just
Lionsgate, by
one.
the way.
Okay,
Isn't that
I'll turn back over, but just very briefly, I would strongly disagree that the content is easy. The hardware is easy, the content is hard. I disagree with that assertion just because normally this could be a thing of just put up a server cabinet. The thing is, their uptime it's literally worth studying just for the general principle of how you keep like disaster recovery. The way that they have done it is very very different from other groups, and it's worth studying. Chaos engineering.
I think
so
I
I've
think
got an
I think the content's also more important, quite frankly, than the technology at this point. So I do agree with the content comment, but that's why I think. By the way, I think it's possible they may buy Lionsgate. They may buy some company that's smaller than them that has content that produces content. By the way, somebody mentioned something, and I'm trying to search if there was a news story today. I didn't see it on this issue of cracking down on the people using other people's passwords. I mean, I doubt that they changed their minds in 4 days. Okay, because I actually was on this whole whatever you want to call this call, whatever, with their management. Okay, and so what they're doing on the password crackdown, they're not going to do anything in North America this year. By the way, so they're doing some trials in some Latin American countries to see how to handle that in terms of maybe trying to reprice certain things and doing a family plan. But they were very unspecific, and by their own admission, they don't know exactly what to do because it's a very delicate dance for them. Because if they do something that cracks down too hard, they may have increased their churn rates. So that's why they're being very careful with it. So I actually think there's only so much they can do. It also depends. No one has any data. I haven't seen any data. When you look at the three different price plans that exist now, keep in mind that if you're on the premium price plan already, it's kind of like a family plan anyway, because you get so many screens. So it's really an issue of the password sharing, I think, on the single screen accounts. And I don't know how many single screen accounts and how many, the different plans. We haven't seen that data. I mean, they just gave a number of it as like 100 million people, basically getting the thing for free. And I mean, they try to put a positive spin on it, which is, at least that means people actually want our content. I mean, because the worst problem would be if people didn't even want to watch the stuff. Um, so anyway, I'll just leave
Actually,
that.
So I've got
actually, Ken,
another
they
brief
they they
angle.
announced Friday that they were going to do it in the U.S. By the way, the password.
Yeah, but it's not. It's eventually. I mean, I mean, unless I was on the call. Okay, I can tell
Yeah.
you exactly what he said. Okay, so unless he announced something in 3 days after the call that was further delineation of that,
Hmm.
they're basically saying, yeah, we're gonna, there's a long term plan to do that everywhere, but it's long term. You will not see it in 2022. You may not even see it in 2023. But but yeah,
Oh, so
but if
that is different from what CNBC reported on Friday. They said I mean, they described it in pretty detail where you can, if you're using it outside of your home, your household, and I don't know what the definition of that is, but you can buy a sub account, which you pay a smaller fee that lets you also use it.
But they're trying that in Latin America. And by the way, if you have any
No,
doubt
no, I
about,
think look up the CNBC thing. They
never
announced it
mind.
on Friday that they're
I'll
doing
give you
it in the
better than
U.S. and it should be
you.
rolled out by next year. It should be
You can
done.
go to Netflix.com. You can go to
Hmm.
Netflix.com, and they do this call. The call that they do, this analyst interview, really every quarter. They're all up there, okay, under the investor relations tab. So this was just what, the end of last week they did, or sometime last week. So you can go listen to their actual management.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
and I think that's what they were interviewing on CNBC. I caught the end of it, but he talked about a sub account that it wasn't Reed Hastings, but just anyways. Going back to your point earlier, Ken, what's interesting is, and I think somebody was talking about the gloom and doom scenario with Netflix here, but we're not talking. Their revenue went up. Netflix is doing okay. We're just talking about the projected revenues are what everybody's worried about.
But the projected revenues will go up once these password. People are not
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah, yeah. That's
Families
why
are
I'm
gonna
saying everybody's
pay
talking about
whatever.
how at the end of Netflix here. I mean,
Yeah, no
I
way.
know certainly in our household, that's all we watch.
Same here.
There's the content is all on Netflix. So
Well,
Yep.
you can trade more money when there's a lot more hype going up or down. So that's one of the reasons we're hearing the over the top narrative. One other thing to consider, Reed Hastings, like the stuff. Netflix CEO is one of the very few people in the industry that's started in artificial intelligence and is running a major corporation. Most other corporations just they throw a hand wave and hire some McKinsey consultants and say put AI somewhere. He's one of the few that actually started with that first and then built that into every aspect of how they built their company. It's not just something that they have as a nice little add a little bit of value added tech with a recommender system, even though that's where they cut their teeth. They have people inside the company that are experimenting with everything from deep fakes to video games to AI generated content. They are years ahead of what a lot of people realize that they have in their internal R&D labs. Now, what they do is they do small little experiments. Sometimes you see things like interactive content like Bandersnatch, etc., like that. And the thing is that deep knowledge and that deep competence does mean that they have an ability to pivot like very other few groups do. When Disney wants to do something like this, they buy up BAMTech. They say, hey, look, we need to do a streaming platform. We'll use the power of the markets and capital to go and buy three of the major IP franchises. We'll put them all on Disney Plus. We'll buy BAMTech Media that can do the baseball streaming, so we can at least have a technical thing, so we can technically do something on a similar class, and that's fine. But Disney, in their corporate DNA, they fired literally half of their IT department for across the entire operation, and then outsourced it to India because they're like, well, why would you need to have competitive IT? What could be possibly the value of that? They do not have the same sort of internal corporate understanding at every single level about how to make their stuff work. Now they've got access to financial markets, but if you look at how much of Disney is owned by institutional capital, it's like 84%. They have a very limited amount that they can pivot and go and according to demands whether Wall Street has on them or not. Netflix has a different number of things that they can work with, and the reason why I bring that up is that I would not count Netflix out. They have the ability to deploy some things and new technologies that are coming down the pipeline with the AI generated content that could completely open up new markets. And I don't see that same sort of competence inside of other Hollywood studios that are just going content, 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 content. This is about the fourth time that Netflix has been ahead of the curve, whether it's beyond the distribution with the mail system, the jump to streaming online, the ability to do a content spread. I would not be surprised if they're able to do another tech leap ahead of their competitors, and to the point where we have to reevaluate things. So I wouldn't count them out just yet.
I have
And I
another
got to tell
brief.
you, there's still a huge international market. I mean, I'm here in Turkey. That's almost everyone's watching. I mean, outside their own Turkish series that they have on TV. I mean, it's still huge, and I know people that are getting budgets and they're making, more international programming. So, outside of US, it's still going on really strong here.
So another perspective, and the reason I personally unsubscribed is nothing to, it's just coincidental. I unsubscribed the family recently from the top plan for a very different reason. It's because it doesn't integrate properly with Apple TV. Netflix is the only service on my Apple TV that I can't. Um, the Netflix does not expose any of the shows to the Apple TV. You have to go into the Netflix app. Whereas everything else, BBC, Amazon Prime, Apple itself, you name it, all of the other systems expose their content to Apple. Apple can recommend the content. I can bookmark all the content in one place in my up next list, and that doesn't go for Netflix. So I was forced to go into Netflix every time, inevitably to re-log in because out of paranoia that I might be a second person sharing a login, even though it's just another Apple TV just down the corridor. Just too much friction. So I would implore them, and I have on Twitter, but they won't listen, to integrate more better with Apple TV, and perhaps that's the tip of the pyramid of other cultural reasons why they don't integrate better with all sorts of other things. So I just hope
They
they
got to pay
integrate
the
them.
Apple tax.
They got to what?
They got to pay the Apple tax if they want to do that, I think.
Ah,
Oh, really?
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe.
they do get a discount. That's right. That was revealed in the court. So the next one is from the Wall Street Journal that U.S. crypto exchanges and companies are ramping up recruiting legal talent as the industry faces increased scrutiny. Law firms are also building crypto practices.
Everyone's about to get sued.
Washington Post says that North Korean hackers who stole $600 million from Axie Infinity are still laundering the money, recently moving about 4.5 million of Ethereum after the U.S. tried to freeze the assets.
That's right, kids. Go and play a video game online, and you too can help a brutal dictatorship evade sanctions. This is what we always wanted for our kids. This is why we built these technologies.
That could I'm assuming that 600 million would go a long way in North Korea.
I mean, you can get a lot of rice for that.
Take you all the way to space.
You can build nukes because nukes aren't that expensive. That's a dirty little secret there.
What does anyone have any sense of what the monthly average salary in North Korea is? I imagine it's or
Salary is like that's a free market principle. This is they're inspired enough by dear leader that they can go on the North Korean spirit. That's the thing that can drive them forward. They don't need these capitalist concerns.
their post currency. You talk about pioneers of universal basic income. They've really
According to 2021's news, the military in the North Korea around oh I have to convert it into the US dollar.
It was like
Three
30% or
three
something.
three okay. Labors around less than 50 US dollars.
50 a month.
For worker
Holy shit!
amount, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
That would that
So the
that was very in
yearly
line with my guess. Yeah, because Cuba is about $30 a month, so I imagine it would have been in that ballpark. So, speaking of South Korea, something called Double Me, a South Korean startup specializing in converting 2D videos into 3D models for the metaverse, raises $25 million from Samsung. So there's another version. So there was a Google thing of converting a 2D image into a 3D model, and now you can do 2D videos, like YouTube videos, into 3D models. That's going to be huge for the metaverse.
They've had this for like near a decade or two as a research project. There's so many different ways of implementing them. None of them 100% work. They're all optimized for something a little bit more than the other. This isn't it's not we have the technology now kind of thing. This is like very much like voice interaction where It was used, and we've had it technically since the 70s, even the 80s. But unless you have a very specialized domain, the accuracy just wasn't high enough to be useful. Being able to 2D scan and just take from images or video and then have that turn to a 3D model, it's a very similar thing where it works 70% of the time on certain things, but it's not really useful until you're trying 80, 90. Once you cross about 92%, 93%, it always comes through. Then it starts to radically increase on adoption rate. And so you're going to see a similar curve to that happened with voice interaction.
Hang on. We might have some breaking news happening. You be the judge. This Elon Muskie guy, he just sent out a tweet
Twitter secured?
rather cryptically. I'm just going to read it. It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 words. The whole tweet in its entirety says, "And be my love in the rain."
What the frack? Is he trying to manipulate the share price?
If
No,
any,
he has hired Trump as communication director.
that would might be one of the most genius moves that one could do at this point.
Yeah, the guy needs a job. Let's give him something.
Can you do that job from a high security prison with things?
And be
That would
my
be
love
really
in the
comical.
rain. Does anyone know? We got to Google that.
So
And
there's Lost like Tears in the Rain is a Blade Runner reference. I don't know if that.
It's
oh,
Blade.
Blade Runner, yeah. Oh no, it's also a song by Robert Frost or a poem by Robert Frost. Did my mic cut out?
Ooh, someone's literate. Elon Musk has read a book. Yay!
Our love came
Yeah,
back.
okay, Tyler.
Oh, now it's not. We got it. Look at this. So the poem by Robert Frost reads, "Our love came back amain. Oh, come forth into the storm and rout, and be my love in the rain." So the line, the stanza just prior to "Be my love in the rain" is "Our love came back amain." So it means the love is back.
I think we should turn
For
all
Trump?
stock, like potential acquisitions into like poetry sessions. That would just it'd make it a lot more interesting to read analyst reports if everything had to be closed with poetry.
Come over the hill and far with me, and be my love in the rain.
English literature could become the most highly compensated profession after trying to read cryptic CEO messages. It's like English lit is the most hot major above AI, computer science majors. Nothing. You need to have more English lit.
Anyway,
Where is our favorite British guy? Cal, come here and describe this for us.
yes, Cal might know the answer to this.
We've
Okay.
got multiple British people here.
By the way, I have a hard stop in 30 minutes. So we're going to blaze through the tweets here in a second. According to CNBC, the United Arab Emirates grants crypto exchange Kraken a license to operate following Binance and FTX.
Unleash the Kraken.
An interview with Puerto Rican Twitch star who suffers from a chronic illness is the most popular video streamer on Twitch with 1 million followers.
Isn't that the Vogue virus?
I don't know. It's robo-taxi startup Pony AI announces that Guangzhou granted them a license to operate 100 self-driving cars as traditional taxis in the Chinese city of Guangzhou there, near Shenzhen and Hong Kong and Guangdong. What else? Streamers are acting like TV networks, according to Vanity Fair, pulling back on edgy content and seeking elevated broadcasts like sitcoms under financial pressure and competition. The EU is forcing Meta and Google and other large online platforms to make their algorithms transparent to users.
This will be colorful.
That's going to be fun to watch. Yeah. So
imagine trying to explain how an unweighted neural net works. I mean, that's at the very least, it's going to be entertaining to watch how they legally do it, because they have to not just do it on a technical blog fashion, but from a legal mandate version. This is going to be colorful watching the amount of backflips that happen.
So the first tweet that I have today is from Bibi that about Apple Pay in Russia, which was no doubt shut down as part of the sanctions, and now the suspension of Apple Pay services has led to a lawsuit against Apple in Russia. The class action lawsuit has now been filed against Apple, arguing that Russian consumers have been harmed by losing access to the electronic wallet service. So now Apple's in a class action lawsuit for complying with American sanctions because it's, as it says,
Where was that filed?
it must be filed in Russia. A class action lawsuit has now been filed against, arguing that Russian consumers have been harmed by losing access to the electronic. Well, they have a right to use Apple Pay, and you have removed it, and now we're having a class action lawsuit against you.
So historically, these things can go for years or decades, and then after a conflict, this is one of the things that comes up part of negotiations for reparations, which depending on who wins or loses, et cetera, peace negotiations. This just ends up being one of the by the way items. So who's ever pushing that, they're definitely playing a longer game on that. That they're gonna have to hold that out for a long time.
Okay, next one is from Katerina, that antidepressants are not associated with improved quality of life in the long run. Overall, people who used antidepressants to manage depression long term did not have a better quality of physical or mental health than those with depression. Okay, and then the next one is from Poppy, that's Spain's first wave-powered power plant to be installed in Mallorca.
These didn't make the cut for a lot of renewable investment technologies, like horizontal wind turbines or photovoltaic solar cells. There are alternative versions like vertical wind turbines or thermal solar cells. Same thing for wave action. It didn't make the cut as being something investable because the amount of energy per amount of units of dollars you're putting into it is very low. That said, there's so much ocean out there, and the places it can generate power are very different from the places you would get the other sorts of power, that if you can optimize for that, eventually it could become very attractive. It's not going to be that way for some time, and whether or not investors can hold up like for a few decades, it's worth considering these more as research projects and something that is for small amounts of like a demonstration power rather than for something that is going to save climate change and such. However, there's plenty of room to work on all sorts of cool projects, so it's definitely worth pursuing. It's just it's a long ways away from being something that can scale up.
Okay. The next one is from PT Yoder, BBC News. Ukraine war. False TikTok videos draw millions of views. Misleading videos have been viewed by millions as it struggles to deal with so much false material.
Psyops?
Now, wow. TikTok is a Chinese company and is one of the few remaining social media platforms active in Russia. Russia banned Twitter and Facebook and even called them terrorist organizations, just to give you some context. And TikTok has figured out a way to play friendly in Russia, and Russia is, as you might know, journalists or anyone kind of defending the counter narrative that Russia is the bad team, the bad guys in this Ukraine invasion, face 15 years in jail. So you can be pretty much rest assured that nobody is sharing narratives that the Kremlin disapproves of on TikTok in Russia, right? So they don't have a content moderation problem in that sense. They're able to keep out all of the narratives that the Kremlin wants to keep out. However, strangely, miraculously, you might say, misleading videos have been viewed millions of times, and TikTok is, quote unquote, struggling to deal with so much false material outside of Russia and China, where inside of Russia and China, they have no problem at all controlling everything that goes on TikTok. Oh boy, do they have no problem controlling what happens in TikTok in China. Oh boy, do they have complete control of what goes on in TikTok in China. But for some reason, they can't control it in the West, and there's just these viral videos of misinformation going on. It's a real puzzle. What's going on here? I wonder if anyone can figure out what's happening there. So the next one's from Poppy. By the way, that was the BBC headline that I read. This Elon Musk Muskie character is back at it again. He says that the Tesla humanoid robot will go into production next year. And he's even made kind of bold claims that it could be as big as Tesla's most important product and whatnot. So the next one is from...
First, he claims that he will ban all the bots, and then he starts building them.
By the way, well, yes. However, they have a maximum speed of about 5 miles per hour.
Or 3 tweets a minute.
They cannot sprint. That's an important handicap that's baked into these humanoid robots, so they cannot take us over. Nissan and Toyota enter the metaverse with two different approaches. Asian car manufacturers Nissan and Toyota make their entry into the metaverse, creating new virtual offices and events for the community. You know, the community of what? Toyota owners, I guess. Katerina shares this one from Vice that the U.S. is sending Ukraine a new type of suicide drone developed by the U.S. Air Force. The newly created Phoenix Ghost is on its way to Ukraine. And, somewhat related, the Kremlin is warning America to stop sending supplies to Ukraine. BB found this one from the BBC. There's a pun in there somewhere that SpaceX is trying to grow meat in space. An experiment to find out whether or not meat can be grown in space has just finished on the International Space Station. Plenty of experiments have been conducted to see whether plants can flourish in space. As of last week, a new test has begun to see if meat cells can grow in space.
A very exciting part of this has been the dream of physicists for decades, to make the calculations easier to see if spherical cows in a vacuum can actually be a thing. They're very excited about this.
China's first court ruling on the topic of NFTs. China rules that NFTs or an NFT marketplace is accountable for art theft by users. So the platform is responsible for the kind of theft. The court decided
Those
that
right clickers.
the court decided that the platform failed to check whether the user who created the NFT was the rightful owner of the artwork.
I think that will made the platforms or the platforms in China to stop NFTs on it because
Okay,
the
so
okay.
something to consider is when if you've ever tried this, and I wouldn't recommend it because it is illegal, but it's very interesting to find out as a comparison if you're looking at counterfeiting and counterfeiting. If you ever try to put a dollar bill in a photocopier, or you take a picture of a dollar bill and then open it up in Adobe Photoshop or any of 24 other photo editing applications, you will get one of the strangest error messages you have ever seen, where it will say it's illegal to do this and the program won't support it, and then it will exit. Now, what's interesting about that is that a lot of people don't realize this exists, which is really interesting to find out. But it's very, very relevant here because, first off, it's an interesting technical challenge. They actually have these like little embedded circles that are in the background, and every application that goes through runs through a very quick. It's a small little 2 kilobyte file, and it just runs through the check. Takes less than half a millisecond to say, is this a financial currency controlled by the Federal Reserve? If it does, then what it says is, I'm not going to work on this, and the program exits. This is actually one of the things that's actually required for certain applications to actually be accepted into certain places. And it's not one that a lot of people realize is a thing because they're very, very subtle about it. The reason why this is relevant is that the technology exists to fingerprint and watermark, and the legal infrastructure does actually exist to say that image isn't supposed to be seen, isn't supposed to be worked on. And I think that as the NFT folks start actually gaining money and they start paying for lawyers, and as they start building up platforms, you're going to see some of those old things start to come into more in the forefront, because they're going to start asking for similar types of protections, and that's fucking ridiculous. But we will see them ask, and they'll be fun to watch.
Okay.
Seriously, Chris, that point, I seriously didn't know. I don't know how many of you knew. I just literally about like 5 days ago, my son told me about this, and I was just like, "This is super crazy that the printer gets." We are talking about like normal printers, like Epson printer and all those
All of
kind of
them.
printers. It's just crazy. I mean, how is it even possible? I
They've
could
had it for
not believe it.
decades.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's a technical marvel, but it's also something that whenever we hear like the libertarian, we have a free internet type kind of crowd cycle, trace what actually happens to money and how that's treated. Because what's fascinating is it reflects a sort of corporate control over what images we're allowed to use and say. There's a whole hoopla recently about Google, whether or not they're going to have like purple underlined words for whether or not it's politically acceptable speech or whatever, and they'll suggest, non-offensive, more inclusive language, etc. But the idea of saying, well, should corporations be able to actually dictate what our tools can say? Now, the reason why this is really relevant is that it's not just Twitter in the public space, but we're talking private tools for private applications. We already have the legal and the technical infrastructure for controlling that. It's just not something that most people realize is in place. So when people start to realize that, it's going to actually start to become very, very relevant whether or not, do we actually have free speech in some of these sectors?
So that's
Okay.
why I can never get an in focus image of a UFO.
So the next
But
one,
the t-
Cheryl just pinned at the top of the room a link from France 24. Is El Salvador's Bitcoin gamble paying off? I've not read that article, so I have no idea what it says. But somebody, and it might have been me, found an article that the Central African Republic just voted in the past few hours to accept Bitcoin as legal tender. So after El Salvador and Honduras, the city of Lugano, the Central African Republic has also accepted Bitcoin as the legal tender of the country. And for those wondering, what is Central African Republic? That's a country in the center of Africa. And if you go to the Wikipedia page, you will find the best etymology section of any country you have ever seen, where it says, and I quote, "The name of the Central African Republic is derived from the country's geographical location in the central region of Africa and the republic form of government."
This is right next to the Congo, which is currently, I think they got Ebola stuff spinning up again. There's this; it's a very conflict-rich area historically. Right now, it's a little bit more like calm than it's been in the past, but very, very recently, the last month or two, things have started to flare again. So
Conflict rich or perhaps peace poor?
I like that framing. Peace poor is a much better way of saying it.
Well,
Just a quick one. Elon's tweet just came in. I hope worst of my critics remain on Twitter because that's what free speech means.
I see it 3
Aw, it's
minutes
so
ago.
kind.
I hope that even my worst critics remain on Twitter.
Aw.
Sounds like
Imagine the entire platform is now going to be revolving around his ego even more so than it is right now because he'll own it, and they can optimize the algorithm for that. It'll be great.
the one thing the Central African Republic is not short of is creative naming. They are masters of branding, and the etymology section I can read that 100 times and laugh every time. Due to the country's geographical location in the central region of Africa and its republic form of government. So it kind of made sense. It's a republic and it's based in the center of Africa, hence that's how they came up with the name.
I like having background articles like this as we're discussing articles. It makes it a lot easier to reference things.
That's the most helpful breakdown of a country's name I've ever heard of. Yeah. So the last article for today is from the New York Times about, and the headline says, and I'll pin it. Here we go. There we go. "This man married a fictional character. He'd like you to hear him out," is the headline. Akihiko Kondo and thousands of others are in devoted fictional relationships served by a vast industry aimed at satisfying the desires of a fervent fan culture. And shows a photo, which you can see at the top of the clubhouse room, of Mr. Kondo-san, at home in Tokyo with a doll of Hatsune Miku, a virtual pop star. And in almost every way, Akihiko Kondo is an ordinary Japanese man. He's pleasant and easy to talk to. He has friends and a steady job, and he wears a suit and a tie to work. There's just one exception. Mr. Kondo is married to a fictional character. His beloved Hatsune Miku is a turquoise-haired, computer-synthesized pop star who has toured with Lady Gaga and starred in video games. After a decade-long relationship, one that Mr. Kondo says pulled him out of a deep depression, he held a small, unofficial wedding ceremony in Tokyo in 2018. Miku, in the form of a plush doll, wore white, and he was in a matching tuxedo. In Miko, Mr. Kondo found love, inspiration, and solace, he says. He and his assortment of Miku dolls eat, sleep, and watch movies together. Sometimes they sneak off on romantic getaways, posting photos on Instagram. Mr. Kondo, 38, knows that people think it's strange, even harmful. He knows that some, possibly those reading this article, hope he'll grow out of it, and yes, he knows that Miku isn't real, but his feelings for her are, he says. Quote, when we're together, she makes me smile, he said in a recent interview. In that sense, she's real.
I
So
wish them well. I wish them well, and
But
Waifu.
I can't
uh,
wait to meet their kids.
Mr.
but
Kondo,
Nick,
hold on, wait,
How,
it gets better. It gets better. Mr. Kondo is one of thousands of people in Japan who have entered into unofficial marriages with fictional characters in recent decades, served by the vast industry aimed at satisfying every whim of a fervent fan culture. Tens of thousands more around the globe have joined online groups where they discuss their commitment to characters from anime, manga, and video games. For some, the relationships are just for a laugh. Mr. Kondo, however, has long known that he didn't want a human partner. Partly, it was because he rejected the rigid expectations of Japanese family life. But mostly it was because he had always felt an intense and even to himself inexplicable attraction to fictional characters,
it's that
etc.
blue hair.
Well, how is
Now,
this working
now,
legally? I mean,
that's a
the
that's a good
doll
question.
doesn't have agency.
Well,
Well, that's might just be a matter of time. Just put that into a robot body by Boston Dynamics, and boom, there you go.
and
It's
if
No,
something to
like right
consider.
now. Yeah, I
Something
mean,
to consider very.
one
Go on.
positive thing is that how many of you can say you upgraded your spouse with a software upgrade? But more seriously, the doll doesn't have agency, and marriage is supposed to be a legal contract.
I've worked with some people that have worked with Hatsune Miku, like in some of the more like their concerts and stuff. Something very briefly to throw out there is a lot of people don't understand what she actually is. She imagine like a tech demo or a brand that's associated with any advanced technology, and it doesn't matter if it's holographic projectors, if it's some sort of like voice synthesizer technology, something that involves some deep fake magic, animation software, whatever you can imagine. The thing is, how do you get people to buy the thing? Because there's the whole problem with in the tech industry of like, if you build it, they will come, but that doesn't always actually work out. What the Japanese have figured out is that if you have a brandable character that has a very devout, loyal fan base, what will happen is that you can put her on and partner her with any technical project, and then you will get an extreme amount of fervent fans that will actually create a vibrant content ecosystem around it and figure out how to connect with all the other types of things. The reason why this is really interesting from a tech perspective is that Hatsune Miku represents also not just like we're seeing like the fun stuff, but on the back end, you could use this sort of this is a very like okay, there's the look at the sad Japanese man and aspect to it, but what's actually a lot more interesting is if you consider him more, I don't want to say a troll, but someone that understands that more people having the conversations about what is the legal rights between robots and AIs and whether or not they can have this, that's exactly the conversation that's being designed around. And so I see them being very clever about this because these sorts of questions being raised are the exact same questions you would have if you actually are having a lot of tech development on that. So I just say look more into Hatsune Miku as a character with things because there's a lot of interesting things in that general direction.
yes,
One
share some.
question.
Dr. Fan, if you'll indulge me for 1 second, I want to make the point, which Cheryl and BB and anyone who's spent significant time in Japan can confirm, that as somebody who's been going there since '92, I've been fascinated by the amazing consistency of Japan being about 10 years ahead of the West on cultural evolution, on all kinds of things. And every time I've gone to Japan, I ask my Japanese friends who I've had since '92, what are crazy things are you kids up to now? And every time I say, holy shit, that's truly crazy. The West will never copy that one. And after a dozen times of saying that, I've come to learn, no, actually, we do copy it. We're always consistently 10 years behind. So, as strange as this one sounds, I'll bet almost anything, given the consistency of how the West trails Japan on these issues, these cultural evolution issues, that anthropological to social anthropology, that we're going to see the same. And I want to kind of highlight that. I want to read the next paragraph. It says, in Tokyo, 2 districts have become meccas for fulfilling character-based dreams, Akihabara for men and Ikebukuro for women. Specialty shops in those neighborhoods are packed with merchandise for characters from popular games and anime. The products for women are especially extensive. Fans can buy love letters from their crushes, reproductions of their clothes, and even scents, like smells, meant to evoke their presence. Hotels offer special packages featuring spa treatments and elaborate meals for people celebrating their favorite characters' birthdays. And on social media, people post photos, art, and mash notes promoting their oshi, a term widely used by Japanese fans to describe the objects of their affection. For some, the relationships represent a rejection of the entrenched breadwinner housewife model of marriage in Japan, says a researcher from the University of Paris who has extensive studied fictional marriages. Quote, to the general public, it seems indeed foolish to spend money, time, and energy on someone who is not even alive, but for character lovers, this practice is seen as essential. It makes them feel alive, happy, useful, and part of a movement with higher goals in life. So, again, as crazy as it sounds, if the tech companies, by the way, are trying to get you to use Siri and Alexa and Google Assistant, boy, oh boy, is there not an opportunity if this becomes a bit more mainstream to make the operating system for your partner.
Enter the movie
I mean,
Her.
Can I
we're
speak, Tyler?
laughing. We're
Dr.
Yeah.
laughing,
Frank?
but honestly, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, joking aside, loneliness, especially after what people, experience after the pandemic, and just, work situations changing, lifestyles changing, quality of life changing. I don't see this not progressing as the years come by. I mean, I think loneliness and people's trust issues and relationships and cultural shifts and everything else. I kind of really can see this. I mean, we're laughing right now, but how it operates and I guess at the end of the day, the feeling that those characters or whatever the intelligence or the AI behind it is, whatever it is that can give back to the person needing such a thing, if it helps them with their quality of life, of course people are gonna, at first they may laugh at it, they may ridicule it, but then people will start, using them, buying them, purchasing them. And really, I mean, there's a huge, I mean, there's something that a lot of people aren't talking about. There is a huge problem right now that I'm seeing in all different cultures, and that is people are feeling more alone, whether they're married or whether they're single, whether they're living alone or if they're not. There is something going on with the shift in the quality of life that people are experiencing. So if this is going to tackle that, laughing aside, I can totally see this, especially 10 years from now as technology is, speeding forward. Seeing it being accepted by the average person is going to be like a no-brainer in the next few years, I think.
Well, Nita, I
Yeah,
think
but
that
can
brings
I?
on the point
Dr. Frank
of.
got a chance afterwards.
Go ahead. Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, everything that everybody is saying is absolutely true. I just wanted to add another meta, as Nicholas L. uses it, and metaverse layer to this. I posted this article because it fascinates me sociologically. If you go into the virtual world of VR chat, most of the avatars there are anime characters. The majority of the people behind them are male, and the most of them spend, the joke in VR chat is most of them spend their time looking in VR chat in mirrors at their what they call waifu, WAIFU, which is their anime wife. So it really is a very big thing, and it's leaking into all culture now. Tyler, I think it's going to be less than 10 years. And it does, as Nada said, have a lot to do with loneliness, but it also has to do with some things about embodiment and that we may not know. It may have to do with economy too. It's expensive to have a spouse. This probably is a little bit cheaper. I even have a few Hatsune Miku avatars that I use from time to time. I'm done.
Dr.
How about
Fran,
kids?
your wife who just now is actually a broken Japanese English for wife.
I'm sorry, it is?
Wife.
Yeah, so
Japanese
I mean,
broken English,
that's
yeah.
what they call it, a waifu.
Great, you know Japanese now.
Right, yeah.
So this reminds me, Tyler, of an article that you read a few months back on a man in Japan who was like had his services where he would sit down with you and you could tell him anything, including if you killed someone. Was that in this
I
space? I
remember
think we were talking about that.
Yeah. He gets paid for doing nothing was the headline. Yeah.
Very briefly, I know some people want to chime on this, but one of the earliest text bots, Eliza, was running on a doctor program, and this is like one of the very first supercomputers, and they had the guy create a very simple parser, with the 30 kilobytes of memory he had access to, and all it would do is it take your questions and rephrase them and put them back out at you. He left the thing in overnight, and he came back, as an extended weekend. He comes after 2 or 3 days, and the secretary lady had been using it, and they found out that she wasn't just using it then; she'd been using it for the last 4 to 6 weeks. And she was saying, and he's saying, you do realize that the other guy at the other end isn't real. He's just a robot. He's like, what are you talking about? He's just in the other room somewhere. I just don't know where in the company he is. He said, no. That program you're talking to isn't real. And she was emotionally distraught about this because she'd been told, you can check the chat logs, she'd been telling it all the things about the problems she was having and all these other aspects at home. And what he was horrified with is the idea of saying, well, we're creating a synthetic intelligence that is replacing human relationships. He was very disturbed by that. After that words, he went, he just kind of left the field. He worked on text adventure games, which is fascinating stuff. This Crowther. Anyways, what's interesting about the modern day version, when we look at technologies like GPT-3 and Dolly and some of these other things to create not just images and extended to text descriptions, we can also create entire advanced narratives and dialogue, and the ability to have those sorts of interactions in the very near future. It could actually result in an amount of ability to have some sort of external emotional processing that could actually be pretty good. Something to consider is that when we look at what we consider to be in a partner,
Chris,
in the recent history is very, very recent. It's not something that has had a historical consistency. And that's important because the role of a marriage partner, with everything from sexual, but also relationship, but also parental, but also friendship, but also hobbies, all these different aspects is through the roof right now, to a point that isn't actually sustainable in our current economic structure. So what you see is fascinating in Japan when they're separating these roles. It's actually kind of interesting because the more that they move the extremes out, like as an overton window, the more it actually justifies other types of relationships, not just with anime characters or whatever, but just having a few thousand people going, hey, we're doing this in a highly prominent way. Well, it also justifies maybe there's some salarymen that don't want to spend their entire life working for the company and only get to see their families for a short period of time. Maybe they want to try some experimental crazy stuff like some other corporate working arrangements. It looks less crazy in comparison. You're going to see more of these sorts of things happen as capitalism has more and more struggles to meet our current economic challenges.
hey guys,
And really crazy thing is,
hold on, Karam. I
sorry,
had a hard stop at 11:30. I have a Zoom meeting that I'm not the.
I was just gonna say. I was just gonna say about the Turing test. I mean, they keep on saying that
Fine,
no machine has passed the
I'm
Turing
out.
test.
See you all later.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, bye. Kuram, you can continue. I will close it afterwards.
Yeah, sorry, Tyler. I was just wanted to. I didn't know that you were going to just leave now. So I was just saying on this particular point what Chris was saying. I mean, he's pretty. I mean, close to passing a Turing test, and I really am amazed at why people keep on saying that, or why this test has not been passed, and all that up till now. But if it is to an extent that a human being is pretty much like feeling it, that have got the withdrawal symptoms or something like that, or emotionally connected with another being, and that's a machine, then that's what the
Yes,
Turing test is. That's what
am
it's
I muted?
all about. That human is not able to actually
Okay,
fully,
great. Thanks.
understand that. Okay, this is not human. So I mean, it should have been passed a long
Karam,
time ago, I guess.
yeah, that Turing test was cited through the medium of textual communication, though, which is a very low bandwidth form of communication, and gives the machine a huge amount of time in it to, if you like, to formulate a response. I think that as the bandwidth of the medium of communication with any synthetic being goes up, the convincibility will go down. So if you move from text to voice conversation with a synthetic being, try and do a real-time voice conversation, that's going to be not as good. Okay, it's just text to speech and speech to text, but it's going to introduce more errors, less natural inflection and so forth, more unnatural emotional emphasis in the voice as you move from speech to a video, try and do a video interaction with that synthetic being. You're going to have even more tells in the way it moves, the way it looks, and so forth, and all the micro gestures. And then when you move from video interaction to in-person
I'm
interaction
a
with what would presumably then have to be an android, you're going to get even more
geek.
tells, even
I'm
further removed. And then when
primarily
you
an
try and have
event
sex with the damn thing, you're really
organizer.
going to
I
find out
do
it's not human.
some
So I think there's a
potential
bandwidth
against
scale that it's
a
going to
large
be
monetary
inversely
event in
proportional to the
Stockholm and
convincibility of the
a large
synthetic
annual event
thingamajig.
there as well.
Two quick points. There's a
And
number of relationships that are made almost entirely
whatever
over
is
text
happening,
messages. Like Tinder
what it
works
costs
with text
both
first.
the
Well, you
mental
have the
and
image
the
first to say, hey, this
interpreting
person
the
exists, but we already have those
sociological
websites for this person
aspect
does
of
not
the
exist for the
experiment.
AI generators.
And
The
that's
text
evolved
interaction component,
into
one of the reasons humans like
a
that is because
daily
that limited bandwidth is actually useful. It
show,
allows the
for lack of a better
imagination to
word,
run. It
called Fake
allows
News
you to
Around the World,
actually
which
put that context in there. We
was
have the
ended
ability to
after
fill in the
COVID
gaps.
started, when
When you
people
have
spent
a
like
high
every
bandwidth, you
day
have to
for
compete
a few
with your
hours.
perception. And if your
It was a lot of
perceptions are
fun.
telling you something isn't working, then
From what I can
it falls back
gather,
to
it's
the other medium.
like
The other thing I pointed out is
You also
that,
have to have
like
theory of
a
mind to
thing
somewhat
happening
manage the other person's
sociologically.
perceptions as you go. So it's
But
not just competing with
yeah,
it, is it? It's also
we're
predicting and
continuing to
managing the other
play with it,
person's
and
perception. Again,
okay.
theory of mind.
Okay, so I'll quickly my second point, and then I'll go to the third one very briefly. So the second point is that there is a pathway for going to those higher bandwidth applications for at least the virtual context, for being able to synthesize deepfake videos, real time replacements of speech, be able to synthesize the ideas on the fly, etc. But you're right that it lacks a theory of mind. Now, here's the last part where I think that kind of wraps the whole thing with like Hatsune Miku and the stuff that we're talking about with the AI perception part, is when you look at end of life type of things where they're talking about memorialize, when someone like shoots a documentary of someone and they say, what if we recorded several hundred or several thousand videos of someone, what they would say, volumetric studio, whatever, a full capture. And then what you do is you use an AI lookup to say someone was asking a question about X, and then it brings up something that's close to what they said from an actual clip. Now, what's interesting is you interpolate that and combine it with a general language model. What that gives you is an approximation that's actually pretty freaking good of what the person actually would have said, what they actually would have done, etc. Now, here's what gets interesting. If you scan enough of people to have that sort of interaction, it actually does have an embodied theory of mind. The difference is that rather than being a static thing that's in the past, it's being actuated just enough to make it work in the present. Now, if you scan enough people, you will be able to create a synthetic thing that will be able to be imperceptible from the human version of it. And it's not because it's embodying all of the emotions, it's embodying all the ones that we would query. And that's the thing that's actually really important, because over time, it's not that we have to create a synthetic theory of mind that has it built up from the ground up. We just have to get close enough that it triggers the human recognition part. And that's something I'd say we're actually pretty close to being able to combine those technologies together. So there is a pathway to doing this. It's not there yet, but it's getting close. All the components and pieces are there.
Since it hasn't been stated, can I just kind of propose a few ethical things, which is, can we take a step back and just understand that we're all psychologically, we have different, how would you say, just psychographics, and kind of just our mental health varies, right? You can segment us as individuals about how together our shit is, right? And my point is simply, can we acknowledge that the rise of this digital twitching that we've been doing for a few decades now, that there's a downside to it, that it actually is causing part of our disconnect to our fellow carbon organic counterparts? And if you kind of take that certain kind of perspective and acknowledge that slow cliff that many of us are on towards isolation is not healthy for some of us, isn't there a need to kind of to just manage that so that they do stay, connected to physical reality? I just think that the whole, using the word psychology and sociology are useful as a backward looking kind of context, but with the rise of everything everybody's describing, it's just I mean, people getting married. I totally agree with Tyler with regards to Japan being years and years ahead in terms of experimenting and creating the future culture in so many ways. But I just wanted to just kind of punctuate that. It just that was my attempt. Nice to hear everybody. It's been a while.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Hi, David.
haven't seen. I just want to add a little point that actually the marriage certificate was issued by the game company. So don't think that the majority of the Japanese society will accept this kind of marriage so easily, but they will make it peacefully
on the top,
lasting in
the
their
first one being the
society.
topic
But you
of,
won't
I think it
get
was
the
phrased
real
something
marriage
like
certificate in
bridging the
that way.
between
Okay.
founders.
Was the
Japan,
marriage certificate
Japan.
an
Yeah,
NFT?
I mean,
In
it's a
Maybe.
Japan,
hot space right
can
now.
I
Yeah.
just say in Japan,
My
right, to get
main
married is
way
very
that
easy. You
I
just need to fill in a form and
frame
submit to
it
the ward
is that
office.
Yeah.
now
But
the
you
No,
don't
there's
have
investment
no
that.
much
flows are getting
verification,
disrupted,
by the way.
essentially,
Yeah, sure. But you have
where tech has
these
evolved
legal
from
issues.
disrupting originally kind of
How
That's
legacy
why
about
I
media
the
bring it
companies,
up. Yeah.
with
Well, if
yeah
they
the
start
laws
sorting
and
those out
newspapers and
now with those
magazines,
legal issues, by the
and
time
then
that they
now
actually do
Hollywood
figure out
and
the
the record
AI and they
labels,
actually
and
do figure
yeah
out
now
a lot of these
the
cybernetic
banks
things,
with
then it
fintech,
might actually
and
have some precedent. So
it was
being an
inevitably going to
early
happen that the investors
pioneer with
themselves
that
would
is one way they could phrase it, but it's
Yeah,
at
yeah,
least
maybe,
that's
entertainment for
maybe.
what we're
everyone
seeing.
else.
And there's all kinds,
Yeah, but
simultaneously, dozens of interesting models
same-sex
evolving,
marriage, I would say
and
just the
some
partnership
of which
just
are
passed
potentially very serious threats.
the
It's
the
proud to see
legal
that
position in Japan.
the
So actually,
lady who found the
Taiwan
call.
is the first country in Asia who
They just
has
presented
this
that
same-sex
the guy
marriage.
who just
So
got
I will say Japan,
who's leading
it's
Sweden
a
for crowd tuning. I think it's called
innovative
him.
and at the
Just
same
came
time
up.
conservative country.
Sounds
So
about
Well,
right. I think they made
LGBTQ,
50
like
digits.
only
Yeah.
it's only a small percentage of the population
Yeah.
that actually has that as a persuasion. But what's really
Kind of
interesting about this is
handsome dude. Anyway,
that it normalizes
um,
a very large number of
and
things not being as extreme anymore.
we
As
discussed it
that
at
constantly
my
moves
monthly
out, it
event
basically
actually
justifies a lot more
for the same
behavior.
reasons
Conservative
about,
factions
and I
typically
asked
are
the
all unhappy about that.
it's
But something it also
it's
reflects is that
it's a
if your
serious
model for
issue now that the
society is
investors are going to have
broken
to
or it's
contend
not
with. They
reflecting
can't go
human
along with
biology
business as
or it's not
normal when you
reflecting
let
social
your mouth
structures that
wrapped
actually
out there.
make
As
people
there's
happy,
several, I have friends
um,
who just
pushing the
announced their
extremes out and
fundraising of
giving people more
$150
permission to
million
experiment and find
Series
other
A,
mediums that's going to work for large numbers
whose
of people with their current economic
algorithmically
setup, with their
based
current technology stack,
funding,
etc.
where
That does
as
actually
a
have a
startup
lot of
you
logic to it, even if it looks
get
really
access
strange
to
going
your
through it.
data
Using it as a
and your
barometer just
dashboards,
for
like your
how happy are
Salesforce
people are current
logins,
with this current
your
system.
Amazon Cloud
This
logins,
reflects a
and
lot
they
of
can
discontent in this
computate
being a socially acceptable way of justifying it
um,
with
in
even if it's a little
aggregate
bit strange.
exactly how well you're
Chris,
doing
I don't think this
as a
is what
startup,
Admiral
and then they
Perry
can
had in mind when he
calculate
woke up Japan from its
essentially a
isolationism.
loan so that you don't even have to
I
give
love
up
these
any
jokes.
equity,
That's great.
a risk-free loan, because they're willing to take. It's almost it's
Okay,
like
so are we
a
done
new
with the
version of a
topic?
bank for startups in a weird way, where they can get
yes. Are you
an
gonna?
Thank you.
name
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
future
So
profits and
yeah,
whatever based on
we
Because
have to
Tyler
close the
is
room
success,
now.
and
Tyler has
holy
gone
shit,
for
is
his
that
Zoom meeting, so if
here's
no
the
one
deal.
else have anything else to say,
The
I saw
traditional
Dr.
investor,
Fran flashing on
and
my. You have
it
the
what
last
it
word
is it's
before we
just a
close the room.
lot more options for
Oh, I
startups.
didn't have anything
That's
to say. I
sort of
want
my
to say
whole
hello to
rant, and
David. That's all.
Okay.
that
Hello,
David has to
look,
David.
go.
Hello,
going into
everybody.
a
Hey
weird era,
guys.
Birthday.
Hey
Okay.
and
David.
Okay, so I'm going to
it makes
close the
it
Good to
room
see you,
now. Thank
David.
you,
in
everybody.
some
See
ways
you tomorrow.
a great time to be
Thank
a
you, Sharon.
founder and a
Bye,
more
Thanks,
challenging
everyone. Have a
Bye,
time
good
because
day.
I feel like
Carol. Thanks,
there's just way
Tyler.
too many
Bye, guys.
Oyasusunai,
startup investors.
minasan.
There's no shortage of startup investors these days. So, but now they now my good I could talk about this for days, and I won't because it's not my. I understand the context is it's not my soapbox. But one of the other really interesting points is the um, there's many new structures being created that allow pretty much anybody to participate as an investor who previously didn't have the bandwidth or resources to participate as a tech investor. The